The wind cut across the prairie like a blade, carrying dust and the promise of a storm. Clara Whitmore stood on the platform of Redemption Springs Station, her worn carpetbag clutched in both hands, watching the train disappear into the golden haze of late afternoon. The whistle's echo faded, and with it, any chance of turning back. She was 26 years old, though the hardness in her eyes made her seem older. The journey from Philadelphia had taken 3 weeks. 3 weeks of jarring tracks, suspicious glances, and the constant weight of knowing she was traveling toward a man she'd never met. A man who'd answered her carefully worded advertisement out of what she could only hope was decency, not desperation. The station platform was nearly empty. A clerk shuffled papers inside the ticket office, pointedly not looking at her. 2 women in proper traveling suits whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes sliding over Clara's patched dress and scuffed boots with unmistakable judgment. Clara had learned to read those looks. They said, "We know what you are. We know why you're here." She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. Let them look. She'd survived worse than their stares. "Miss Whitmore?" The voice came from behind her, low, careful, with a Western drawl that softened the consonants. Clara turned and found herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same rough landscape surrounding them. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that fell just past his collar. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and they held hers with a directness that made her breath catch. "I'm Ethan Hale," he said. "I wrote to you." Clara nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She'd memorized his letters, 3 of them, each one brief and honest in a way that had surprised her. He told her about his ranch, about the work that needed doing, about his need for a partner rather than a servant. He'd made no promises about love, but he'd offered something more valuable: respect. "I'm Clara," she managed. "Thank you for meeting me." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise maybe, or relief. He reached for her bag. "Let me take that. Wagon's just over there." As they crossed the platform, Clara felt the weight of watching eyes. The 2 women had stopped pretending not to stare. The clerk stood in his doorway now, arms crossed, and near the livery stable, a group of men had paused in their conversation to observe the new arrival. "They're always like this with newcomers," Ethan said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Town's got nothing better to do than gossip." "I'm used to it," Claire replied, and hated how true that was. The wagon was sturdy but worn, the kind of practical vehicle that spoke of hard work and careful maintenance. Ethan helped her up to the bench seat with a hand that was calloused but gentle. As he climbed up beside her and took the reins, Clara caught sight of a man standing outside the general store. He was watching them with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Younger than Ethan, perhaps 30, with the same dark hair but a completely different bearing. Where Ethan seemed hewn from the landscape, this man looked polished, deliberate. His suit was Eastern cut, his boots expensive, and his smile, when he caught Clara looking, was sharp as broken glass. "Who is that?" she asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "My brother, Victor." He didn't elaborate, and Clara didn't push. She'd learned to recognize danger in its many forms, and something about the way Victor Hale smiled at her set off every alarm she'd carefully constructed over the years. They rode in silence out of town, the buildings giving way to open prairie. The landscape was beautiful in its harshness, rolling grassland stretching to distant bluffs, the sky huge and unforgiving overhead. Clara had grown up in the crowded streets of Philadelphia, where the horizon was always blocked by buildings, and the air tasted of coal smoke. This openness should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt exposed. "Ranch is about 5 miles out," Ethan said finally. "Not much to look at, but it's solid. House needs work. I won't lie to you about that. But it's dry and it's safe." "Safe is good," Clara murmured. He glanced at her, something sharp in his gaze. "You running from something specific, or just running?" The question was too perceptive. Clara looked away, watching the grass ripple in the wind. "Does it matter?" "No," Ethan said after a moment. "I suppose it doesn't. We all got our reasons for ending up where we do." They fell back into silence, but it felt different now, not uncomfortable, but weighted with mutual understanding. Whatever had driven Ethan Hale to place an advertisement for a wife, it hadn't been simple loneliness. And whatever had driven Clara to answer, It hadn't been simple desperation, though desperation had certainly played its part. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when they finally crested a rise, and Clara saw the ranch spread out below. It was modest: a house, a barn, several outbuildings, corrals holding horses and cattle. Nothing grand, but well maintained. Loved, even, in the way that places are loved when they're all a person has. "It's not what you're probably used to," Ethan said, and there was something almost apologetic in his tone. Clara thought of the boarding house where she'd spent the last year, the thin walls and thinner meals, the landlady's suspicious eyes tracking her every move. She thought of the factory before that, 12-hour shifts in the deafening clatter of machinery. She thought of all the places she'd tried to make home and failed. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Ethan looked at her with surprise, then something that might have been hope. "Come on, then. Let's get you settled before dark." The house was small but clean, with 3 rooms: a main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, a bedroom, and a smaller back room currently filled with supplies and tack. Ethan showed her around with the careful pride of a man who'd built something with his own hands. "Bedroom's yours," he said. "I'll take the back room. Get it cleared out tonight." Clara turned to him. "We're not—" She stopped, heat rising in her cheeks. "I thought the letter said—" "The letter said I needed a partner," Ethan interrupted gently. "Not a bed warmer. You'll have your privacy, Clara. I meant what I wrote. This is about building something together, not that." Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her dizzy. She'd answered the advertisement half convinced she was trading one form of survival for another. But Ethan's eyes were steady, honest. He meant what he said. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, then moved toward the stove. "You must be hungry. Not much of a cook, but I can manage stew that won't poison you." "I can cook," Clara said quickly, "if you show me where things are." They moved around each other in the small kitchen with careful politeness, neither quite comfortable but both trying. Clara found herself relaxing incrementally as she worked. The stove was good, the supplies adequate. She made biscuits from memory while Ethan watched with something like amazement. "Haven't had proper biscuits in 3 years," he admitted. "Not since—" He stopped abruptly. "Since?" Clara prompted. "Since my wife died." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's hands stilled in the dough. "I didn't know. The letters didn't mention—" "Didn't see the point in dwelling on it," Ethan said. He was staring out the window now, his profile hard. Fever took her fast. 1 week she was fine, the next she was gone. That was 3 years back. Tried to manage alone, but— He shrugged. "Turns out a ranch is too much for one person, and the silence gets heavy after a while." Clara understood about heavy silence. She shaped the biscuits with practiced efficiency, giving him space to say more or not. "Victor said I was disrespecting her memory," Ethan continued after a moment. "Bringing in a new wife so soon. But 3 years isn't soon, and Rachel would have wanted me to be practical. She was always practical." "Your brother doesn't approve," Clara observed carefully. Ethan's laugh was harsh. "Victor doesn't approve of much I do. He's got his fancy business in town, his big plans for the territory. Thinks I'm wasting myself out here with cattle and dirt." "Are you?" He looked at her then, really looked at her. "No, this land, it's the only thing that's ever made sense to me. The work is hard, but it's honest. You put in effort, you get results. Not like people. People lie and scheme and hurt each other for no good reason." He paused. "I'm not good with words, Clara, but I'll tell you straight. I'll work myself to the bone to make this place succeed. I'll treat you fair and honest, and I'll never raise a hand to you or speak to you with disrespect. That's my promise." Tears pricked Clara's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back fiercely. "That's more than most women get." "Then most women deserve better than they're getting." They ate dinner as the last light faded from the sky. The stew was simple but good, the biscuits better. Ethan ate like a man who'd forgotten what real cooking tasted like, and Clara felt a small spark of pride. She had skills. She could be useful here. She could belong. After dinner, while Ethan cleared his things from the back room, Clara stepped outside. The night was immense. The sky scattered with more stars than she'd ever seen. The wind had died down, leaving an almost sacred silence. No carriages rattling on cobblestones, no factory whistles, no shouting landlady or crying babies through thin walls. Just space, just possibility. Beautiful, isn't it? Clara jumped. She hadn't heard anyone approach, but now a figure separated from the shadows near the barn. Even in darkness, she recognized Victor Hale's polished bearing. "Mr. Hale," she said carefully, "I didn't hear you ride up." "I walk soft," Victor replied, moving closer. In the moonlight, his smile was charming, practiced. "Wanted to welcome you properly to Redemption Springs. My brother can be a bit rough around the edges. Forgets his manners. He's been very kind." "Has he?" Victor's eyes traveled over her in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. Not overtly inappropriate, but assessing, cataloging. "Well, that's good. Ethan's had a hard time since Rachel died. Needed someone to help him get back on his feet." Something in his tone made Clara bristle. "I'm not here out of pity, Mr. Hale." "No?" His smile widened. "Then why are you here? A woman like you, clearly educated, clearly from somewhere much more civilized than this dusty corner of nothing. What makes a woman like you answer an advertisement from a grieving rancher?" Clara lifted her chin. "That's between your brother and me." Of course, Victor raised his hands in mock surrender. "I don't mean to pry. Just looking out for family. Ethan's all I have, you understand. I'd hate to see him hurt. Again." The implied threat was delicate but unmistakable. Clara held his gaze. "I have no intention of hurting anyone." "Intentions are funny things," Victor mused. "We all have the best intentions. But circumstances change. Secrets come out. People aren't always what they seem." He stepped back, still smiling. "Well, I won't keep you. Welcome to Redemption Springs, Miss Whitmore. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." He disappeared into the darkness as quietly as he'd come. Clara stood frozen, her heart hammering. There was something deeply wrong about Victor Hale, something that went beyond ordinary suspicion of newcomers. He'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved, or a piece to be moved on a board only he could see. "Clara?" Ethan appeared in the doorway, backlit by lamplight. "You all right?" She forced herself to breathe normally. "Yes, just getting some air." "Victor was here," Ethan said flatly. It wasn't a question. "He said he wanted to welcome me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Stay away from him if you can. I know he's my brother, but..." He trailed off, struggling with something. "Just trust me on this. Victor's got his own way of doing things, and it usually ends with someone getting hurt." Clara nodded, filing that warning away with all the others she'd collected over the years. "I'll be careful." "Good." Ethan held the door open. "Room's ready when you are. Tomorrow we'll get you properly settled. Show you the ranch. Introduce you to the hands. They're good men, mostly. Keep to themselves." Clara followed him inside into the warmth and light. The bedroom was simple. A bed, a dresser, a small table with a lamp. But the sheets were clean and the walls were solid and the door had a lock. Luxuries she hadn't taken for granted in years. "Thank you," she said softly. "For all of this." Ethan nodded, looking uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." After he left, Clara sat on the edge of the bed and let herself shake. The day had been too much. The arrival, the judgmental stares, Ethan's unexpected decency, Victor's veiled threats. She was exhausted down to her bones. But she was here. She'd made it. Whatever came next, at least she wasn't running anymore. At least not yet. Clara woke to the sound of roosters and pale dawn light filtering through thin curtains. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory rushed back, the train, the platform, Ethan's steady gray eyes, the ranch. She dressed quickly in her other dress, equally worn but clean, and made her way to the main room. Ethan was already up, coffee brewing on the stove. He looked up when she entered, and Clara caught something, surprise, relief, in his expression before it shuddered. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's almost ready." "I can make breakfast," Clara offered. "No need to jump right in. Take a day to get your bearings." But Clara was already moving toward the pantry, taking stock of what was there. Flour, salt, eggs from the chickens she'd heard outside, bacon hanging in the cold cellar. She could work with this. She needed to work with this. Needed to prove her usefulness before Ethan could have second thoughts about the strange woman he'd imported from back east. They ate in companionable silence, the awkwardness of the previous night easing slightly. After breakfast, Ethan showed her around the ranch properly. The barn was well organized, the animals healthy. He introduced her to the two hired hands, Tom, an older man with kind eyes and few words, and Miguel, younger, with a quick smile and excellent English despite a Spanish accent. Both men tipped their hats respectfully, but Clara saw the questions in their eyes. Another mail-order bride. Another woman who might not last through the first hard winter. She'd prove them wrong. They were mending fence in the north pasture when riders approached. Clara recognized Victor immediately. He sat his horse like a man posing for a portrait, but he wasn't alone. With him were two other men, both wearing town clothes rather than work gear. "Ethan," Victor called out cheerfully. "Taking a break from hospitality to do some honest work?" Ethan's shoulders tensed, but his voice remained level. "What do you want, Victor?" "Can't a man visit his brother?" Victor swung down from his horse with practiced grace. His companion stayed mounted, watching. "Wanted to check on your new bride, make sure she's settling in well." "She's settling fine." "Is she?" Victor turned his attention to Clara, who stood holding a fence post, very aware of how she must look. Dusty, sweating, her dress already showing signs of ranch work. "Miss Whitmore, getting the full frontier experience, I see." "I'm here to work," Clara said evenly. "Noble." Victor's smile never wavered. "Though I wonder if you quite knew what you were signing up for. Ranch life is brutal for someone unaccustomed to it. The isolation alone drives some women mad." "I'm not some women." "No," Victor agreed, his eyes sharp. "No, I don't suppose you are." One of the other men cleared his throat. "Victor, we should get back. The meeting—" "Of course." Victor swung back into his saddle. "I'm organizing a town gathering next week, Ethan, to discuss some business opportunities. I expect you'll be there. I've got work to do. Bring your bride. Let people meet her properly. Get ahead of the gossip. You know how this town is." It wasn't a suggestion. Clara could hear the steel beneath Victor's pleasant tone. Ethan heard it too, his jaw clenched. "We'll see," he said. "Do that." Victor tipped his hat to Clara. "Miss Whitmore, I'm sure we'll be seeing each other very soon." They rode off in a cloud of dust. Ethan stood watching them go, his hands fisted at his sides. "He's right about one thing," he said finally. "Town will want to get a look at you. Might as well get it over with." "Is he always like that?" Clara asked. "Like what?" "Like he's 3 moves ahead in a game only he knows he's playing." Ethan looked at her with something like respect. "You see that, do you? Most people just see the charm." "I've known men like your brother," Clara said quietly. "They smile while they're deciding how to use you." "Victor's not—" Ethan stopped, sighed. "Hell, maybe he is. We used to be close when we were young, but something changed in him after he moved to town, started making money. Now everything's about advantage, about winning. And you? I just want to be left alone to work my land." Clara understood that impulse. But she also understood that men like Victor Hale didn't leave people alone. They circled and prodded and pushed until they found weakness. And then they struck. The town gathering was in 5 days. 5 days to prepare herself for judgment, for whispers, for whatever game Victor was playing. 5 days until the careful peace of the ranch would shatter. Clara went back to work on the fence, driving posts into hard ground with methodical efficiency. She'd survived worse than small-town gossip. She'd survived her father's fists and her husband's neglect and the grinding poverty that had followed his death. She'd survived the judgment of Philadelphia society when she'd taken factory work. She'd survived the shame of becoming a mail-order bride. She would survive Redemption Springs too. She had to. Because the alternative, running again, starting over again, being nobody again, was a death of its own. And Clara Whitmore was done dying by inches. Whatever Victor Hale was planning, whatever the town thought of her, Clara would stand firm. She'd found something here on this wind-scoured ranch with this quiet, decent man. Not love, not yet, maybe never, but possibility, respect, a chance, and she would fight to keep it. The fence post sank deep into the earth with a satisfying thud. Clara wiped sweat from her forehead and reached for the next one. Behind her, she heard Ethan working, steady and strong. The sun climbed higher. The wind whispered through the grass. And in town, 5 miles away, Victor Hale smiled at his reflection in the window of his office and began to plan. The 5 days passed too quickly. Clara threw herself into ranch work with an intensity that surprised even Ethan. She mended clothes, organized the pantry, cleaned years of bachelor neglect from corners and shelves. She learned to collect eggs without getting pecked, to pump water from the well, to read the sky for coming weather. The physical labor left her exhausted each night, but it was honest exhaustion, the kind that came from building rather than surviving. Ethan watched her with something approaching wonder. On the third day, while they were sorting through tack in the barn, he finally spoke what was on his mind. "You don't have to prove anything, you know." Clara looked up from the bridle she was oiling. "What do you mean?" "This." He gestured at the organized chaos around them. "Working yourself to the bone. I brought you here as a partner, not a servant." "I know the difference," Clara said quietly. "I've been both." The admission hung between them. Ethan set down the saddle he'd been examining and came closer. "You want to tell me about it?" "Not particularly." "Fair enough." He paused. "But Clara, whatever you're running from, whatever happened before, it doesn't matter here. You understand that?" She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the past could stay buried, that reinvention was possible, that a person could simply choose to become someone new. But experience had taught her otherwise. The past had teeth. It always caught up eventually. "I was married before," she heard herself say, "in Philadelphia. He was a clerk in my father's shipping office. Respectable. Or so everyone thought." Ethan waited, not pushing, just listening. "He drank. And when he drank, She swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter. He's dead now. Fell down the stairs of a tavern 3 years ago. Broke his neck. They said I should be devastated, but I'd never felt more relieved in my life." "Did he hurt you?" Ethan's voice was very quiet. "Yes." "Then I'm glad he's dead." The bluntness of it shocked a laugh out of her. "You're not supposed to say that." "Why not?" "It's true." Ethan's gray eyes were fierce. Any man who raises his hand to a woman deserves whatever he gets, and any woman who survives it deserves a fresh start. Clara felt something loosen in her chest, some knot she'd been carrying for years. The town didn't see it that way. After he died, they treated me like I'd somehow caused it, like I'd driven him to drink, to recklessness. His family cut me off completely. I lost the house, everything. Had to take factory work just to eat. That why you left? That and other reasons. Philadelphia has a long memory and a short supply of forgiveness. She went back to working the oil into the leather, needing something to do with her hands. "I'm not a good woman, Ethan. Not by their standards, maybe not by yours. I'm divorced in everything but name. I've worked in factories. I've done what I had to do to survive. If the town finds out..." "They won't find out from me," Ethan interrupted. "And even if they did, I don't care what they think. You're my wife now. That's all that matters." "I'm not really your wife," Clara said. "Not in the way that counts." Something flickered in Ethan's expression. Regret, maybe, or longing. "No, but you could be. When you're ready, if you ever are." The possibility hung in the air between them, fragile and enormous. Clara met his eyes and saw patience there, and desire carefully leashed, and something that might grow into love given time. It terrified her. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," she whispered. "That's all right," Ethan said. "I'm a patient man." They went back to work in a silence that felt different now, weighted with shared secrets and tentative trust. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain. That evening, Tom knocked on the door with news from town. The gathering had been moved up 2 days. Victor was calling it a community meeting, but rumors said he had some kind of announcement, something big. "He's up to something," Tom said, his weathered face concerned. "Been talking to the railroad people, word is, and the bank. You know how Victor gets when he's got a scheme brewing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I know." After Tom left, Clara found Ethan standing at the window, staring toward town, though it was too dark to see anything but stars. "What kind of schemes?" she asked. "The kind that make him rich, and everyone else poor. When we were young, Victor was always the smart one. Could talk anyone into anything, could see angles nobody else saw. Pa thought he'd amount to something great. Ethan's laugh was bitter. Guess he was right. Just didn't specify what kind of great. You think this gathering has something to do with you? With us, Ethan corrected. Victor doesn't do anything without a reason. He wanted you at this meeting specifically. That means he's got something planned. Clara felt cold despite the warmth of the room. Like what? I don't know. But I learned a long time ago, when Victor smiles, someone's about to bleed. The gathering was set for Saturday evening at the town hall. They arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the ramshackle buildings of Redemption Springs in shades of gold and shadow. The main street was crowded with wagons and horses. It seemed the entire territory had turned out. Clara wore her best dress, carefully mended and pressed. She'd pinned her hair up in the style she remembered from better days, hoping to project respectability. But she felt the stares immediately, curious, judgmental, hungry for scandal. Women whispered behind fans. Men's eyes lingered too long. Ethan stayed close to her side, his presence a solid anchor. They made their way into the hall, which was packed with people perched on benches and standing along the walls. At the front, on a raised platform, Victor held court. He was dressed impeccably, his dark suit cut in the latest fashion. Next to him stood several men Clara didn't recognize, businessmen by their bearing, and one woman older with sharp eyes and a harder face. Who is she? Clara whispered. Margaret Holbrook, Ethan murmured back, owns half the businesses in town. Victor's been courting her approval for years. They found space near the back. Clara was acutely aware of the whispers spreading through the room like fire through dry grass. That's her. The mail-order bride. Look at her dress. Philadelphia, you think? Why would a woman like that end up here? What's she hiding? Victor spotted them, and his face lit up with what would have looked like genuine pleasure to anyone who didn't know him. Ah, there's my brother. Ethan, Clara, so glad you could make it. We'll start soon. The meeting was called to order. Victor launched into a speech about progress and opportunity, about the railroad coming through and bringing prosperity to Redemption Springs. He painted a vision of a thriving town, of businesses and banks and civilization pushing back the rough edges of frontier life. People listened, rapt. Victor had always been a magnificent speaker. But progress requires sacrifice, Victor continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. It requires us to look hard at who we are, what we stand for. It requires trust. Clara felt Ethan tense beside her. Which brings me to a difficult matter, Victor said, his expression pained. A family matter, really, but one that affects us all. My brother Ethan, many of you know him. Good man, hard worker. But lately, I've been concerned. Ethan started to rise. Clara grabbed his arm, holding him back. Don't, she whispered. He wants you to react. Concerned about what? Someone called from the crowd. About his judgment, Victor said sadly. You all know he lost his wife 3 years ago. Terrible tragedy. Rachel was beloved by everyone, and we all understood when Ethan struggled afterward. But this, he gestured vaguely. Bringing in a stranger, a woman from back east with no references, no family connections, no one who can vouch for her character. It's reckless. Possibly dangerous. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara felt dozens of eyes swing toward her. Victor, what the hell? Ethan began, standing. I'm not saying this to hurt you, brother, Victor interrupted, his voice dripping with false concern. I'm saying it because I love you, because I'm worried. This woman appears out of nowhere, and suddenly you're neglecting the ranch, missing business meetings, isolating yourself even more than before. It's not healthy. I haven't missed a single meeting, Ethan shot back, and the ranch is in better shape than it's been in years. Is it? Victor turned to the crowd. Tom Wheeler, you worked for Ethan last season. How would you characterize his state of mind lately? Tom stood reluctantly, his hat crushed in his hands. Ethan's been fine, far as I can tell. Working hard, same as always. But distracted? Victor pressed. More short-tempered than usual? Tom hesitated just a moment too long. Maybe a little, but that ain't unusual when— Thank you, Tom. Victor cut him off smoothly. I'm sure Ethan's been under a lot of pressure. Taking on a new wife is a big step, especially for a man who's been alone so long. I just want to make sure he's making this decision for the right reasons, that he's not being taken advantage of. The implication was clear. Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and dangerous. This was what Victor had been planning. Not a direct attack, but something more insidious. Plant doubt, raise questions, make her presence seem suspicious, make people wonder what she was really doing here. "Mister?" "Hale," she said, standing before she could second-guess herself. Her voice rang out clear and steady. "If you have concerns about me, perhaps you should address them directly rather than hiding behind concern for your brother." Victor's smile widened. "Miss Whitmore, or should I say Mrs. Hale? We haven't quite established which, have we?" "We were married by the circuit judge 3 days after I arrived," Clara said. It was a lie, but a necessary one. "So, yes, Mrs. Hale is appropriate." "I see." Victor made a show of looking surprised. "That was quick, almost as if someone was in a hurry to secure legal standing. Or as if two adults made a decision about their own lives," Clara countered, "which, unless I'm mistaken, is none of your business." A few people in the crowd chuckled. Victor's expression hardened just slightly. "You're absolutely right," he said smoothly. "Your marriage is your affair. I'm simply looking out for my brother's interests, and for the community's interests. We've had trouble with confidence schemes before, people coming in from outside, taking advantage of lonely settlers. I'd hate to see Ethan fall victim to that." "Are you accusing me of being a criminal?" Clara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm simply suggesting that in a community like ours, we have a responsibility to know who's living among us, to ensure everyone is who they claim to be." "And who do I claim to be?" "That's an excellent question." Victor pulled a paper from his pocket. "I took the liberty of writing to some contacts in Philadelphia. The address you listed in your correspondence with Ethan, the boarding house on Market Street. The landlady there remembers you. Says you left without paying 3 months' rent. Also says there were some questions about your husband's death." The room erupted in whispers. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. How had he found out? How had he tracked down that specific detail from her past? "That's a lie," she said, but her voice shook. "Is it?" "The landlady's letter is quite detailed. She mentions that the police investigated, that there were suspicions." "My husband died in a tavern," Clara cut him off, her voice rising. "He fell downstairs because he was drunk. There was an inquest. I was cleared of any wrongdoing." "Cleared, yes, but suspicions remained." Victor's voice was gentle, sympathetic even. "I'm sure it was all a misunderstanding, but you can see why people might be concerned. A woman whose husband dies under suspicious circumstances, who then flees without paying her debts, who shows up in a frontier town and immediately secures marriage to a wealthy landowner." "I'm not wealthy," Ethan interjected, his voice like gravel. "You own 500 acres, brother. That makes you one of the richest men in the territory." Ethan moved toward the platform, his fists clenched. "Enough. Whatever game you're playing, Victor, it ends now. This isn't a game. It's about protecting you." Victor turned to the crowd. "I love my brother. Our parents entrusted me to look after him before they died, and I take that responsibility seriously. If this woman is genuine, if her intentions are pure, then I'll be the first to welcome her. But until we know more, until we can verify her story—" "My story doesn't need verification," Clara said. Every eye in the room was on her now. She felt like she was back in that Philadelphia courtroom, being judged for the crime of surviving. "I came here for a fresh start, that's all. No conspiracy, no scheme, just a woman looking for a better life." "At my brother's expense," Victor said softly. "No, with your brother's willing partnership. Can you prove that? Can you prove you're not simply a desperate woman using Ethan as a means to an end?" The question hung in the air. Clara realized with sinking certainty that there was no right answer. Anything she said would sound defensive. Any defense would sound like guilt. Victor had constructed the trap perfectly. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she said finally, "or to any of you. Ethan knows who I am. That's enough." "Is it, though?" Victor looked genuinely sad. "Brother, I know you want to believe in her, but consider, what do you really know about this woman? What has she told you about her past, about why she really left Philadelphia?" Ethan's jaw worked. He looked at Clara, and she saw doubt flicker in his eyes. Just for a moment, but it was there. And Victor saw it too. "I see," Victor said quietly. "She hasn't told you everything." Everyone's entitled to their privacy, Ethan said, but the conviction in his voice had weakened. Privacy? Yes, but not secrets. Not when those secrets could affect everyone in this community. Victor addressed the crowd again. I'm proposing we form a committee to investigate Mrs. Hale's background properly, to verify her claims to ensure she poses no threat to my brother or to Redemption Springs. If she's innocent, as she claims, then the investigation will prove it. And if she's not, he left the implication hanging. The crowd buzzed with discussion. Clara saw heads nodding, saw suspicion hardening into certainty on face after face. Margaret Holbrook stood. I think that's wise, Victor. We can't be too careful these days. Others chimed in. The tide was turning. Clara felt panic rising in her throat. This was exactly what she'd feared. The past catching up, the judgment, the certainty that she was guilty of something even if no one could quite name what. This is ridiculous, Ethan said, his voice cutting through the noise. Clara's done nothing wrong. She's worked hard on my ranch. She's been respectful to everyone she's met. She doesn't deserve this witch hunt. No one's hunting witches, Victor said. We're simply being prudent. Surely you can see that, Ethan. Surely you understand our concerns. The only thing I understand is that you're trying to humiliate my wife for some reason I can't figure out. Not humiliate, protect. Victor's expression was earnest, convinced, or a perfect imitation of convinced. Protect you from making a mistake that could cost you everything. The only mistake I've made is coming to this meeting, Ethan said. He grabbed Clara's hand. We're leaving. They pushed through the crowd toward the door. People pressed back to let them pass, but Clara could feel their eyes, their judgment. Someone spat the word gold digger, just loud enough to hear. Someone else said murder under their breath. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Clara was shaking, whether from anger or fear or both she couldn't tell. Ethan helped her into the wagon without speaking. His face was like carved stone. They were half a mile from town when he finally broke the silence. Is it true? Clara's stomach dropped. Is what true? About your husband's death, the investigation. There were questions, Clara admitted. The police investigated because a young wife and a dead husband always raises suspicions, but they found no evidence of foul play. He was drunk, Ethan. He fell. That's all. And the boarding house? The unpaid rent? I left because I couldn't afford it anymore. The factory closed. I lost my job. I was going to pay her back when I could, but then your letter came and She trailed off. I ran. I admit that. I ran because I was drowning, and you offered me a lifeline. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Did you lie to me about anything else? No. Everything I told you in my letters was true. Maybe not complete, but true. Why didn't you tell me about the investigation? Would you have married me if I had? Clara shot back. Would you have brought me here if I'd written, by the way, some people think I might have killed my husband? I don't know, Ethan said honestly. I'd like to think it wouldn't have mattered, but I don't know. The admission hurt more than Clara expected. She'd thought, foolishly perhaps, that they'd begun to build something, trust, if not love. But Victor's words had planted doubt, and doubt was a poison that spread quickly. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the ranch, Clara climbed down from the wagon without waiting for help. She went straight to the bedroom and closed the door. She didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that tears solved nothing. Instead, she sat on the bed and tried to think. Victor had outmaneuvered her completely. He'd turned the entire town against her without making a single direct accusation. He'd raised questions that couldn't be definitively answered, and he'd driven a wedge between her and Ethan without lifting a finger. It was masterful. Clara would have admired it if she wasn't the target. A soft knock at the door. Clara? Go away. Please. I need to talk to you. She opened the door reluctantly. Ethan stood there, his hat in his hands, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. I'm sorry, he said, for doubting you, for letting Victor get in my head. You have every right to doubt me, Clara said tiredly. I haven't been completely honest. None of us are completely honest. We all have things we don't talk about. He took a breath. I need to know, did you kill your husband? Clara looked him straight in the eye. No. Did you want to? She thought about the bruises, the fear, the years of walking on eggshells. Yes, many times. but I didn't. He killed himself with liquor and stupidity. I just didn't mourn him the way a wife was supposed to. Ethan nodded slowly. That's good enough for me. But not for the town. Damn the town. Victor stirred them up, but they'll settle down. They always do. You don't believe that any more than I do, Clara said. This isn't going away, Ethan. Your brother has started something, and he won't stop until he's finished it. Then we'll fight back. How? He's planted doubt. You can't fight doubt with facts. Facts just make you look defensive. Ethan was quiet. Then, what if we gave them what they wanted? Let them form their committee. Let them investigate. You said you were cleared in Philadelphia. The records would prove that. The records would prove I was investigated. That's all people will remember. Then what do you suggest? Clara thought about it. About Victor's smile. About the way he'd orchestrated everything. About the trap he'd set and how perfectly she'd walked into it. I think, she said slowly, that Victor wanted more than just to embarrass me tonight. He wanted to isolate us. Turn the town against us so we have nowhere to turn when he makes his next move. What next move? I don't know, but men like your brother don't settle for small victories. He's building towards something bigger. Ethan frowned. You really think he's that calculating? I know he is. I've known men like him before. Clara moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. He's going to come after the ranch, Ethan. That's what this is about. He wants your land. That's crazy. Victor doesn't care about ranching. No, but he cares about money and power. And 500 acres near a new railroad line? That's worth a fortune to the right buyer. Clara turned to face him. He can't just take it from you. But if he can discredit you, make you seem incompetent or dangerous, maybe get you declared unfit. He's my brother, Ethan interrupted. He wouldn't he? Clara asked quietly. You said yourself something changed in him, that everything became about winning. What makes you think family is exempt from that? Ethan sank down onto the chair, suddenly looking much older. Rachel used to say the same thing, that Victor was dangerous. I always thought she was being paranoid. She wasn't. They sat in silence, the weight of realization settling over them. Outside, an owl called. The wind rattled the windows. And somewhere in town, Victor Hale was no doubt celebrating his victory, already planning his next move. Clara made a decision. She'd spent too much of her life running, hiding, letting other people define her. Not this time. This time, she would stand and fight, not just for herself, but for Ethan, for the ranch, for the fragile possibility of a life she'd only just begun to imagine. We need a plan, she said. Ethan looked up at her, surprise in his gray eyes. I thought you'd want to leave, catch the next train east. And let your brother win? Not a chance. Clara's voice was hard. I'm done running. If Victor wants a fight, he'll get one. Clara, you don't understand what you're up against. Victor has money, influence. Half the town owes him favors. And you have the truth. We have the truth. Truth doesn't always win. No, Clara agreed, but courage does. Or at least it gives you a fighting chance. She saw something shift in Ethan's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. He stood, crossing to stand beside her at the window. All right, he said, we fight. But we do it smart. We need allies. Do you have any? A few. Tom would stand by me. Miguel, too. Some of the smaller ranchers, they're wary of Victor's expansion plans. And there's Judge Morrison. He's straight dealing, doesn't owe Victor anything. Then we start there, Clara said. We build our own coalition before Victor can tighten the noose. And you? Ethan asked. What will you do? Clara thought about the women in the town hall, whispering behind their fans. She thought about Margaret Holbrook's hard eyes and calculating expression. She thought about the power women held in frontier towns. Not official power, but the kind that shaped reputations and determined who belonged and who didn't. I'm going to make some friends, she said. Ethan looked skeptical. After tonight? Clara, they think you're a criminal. They think I might be a criminal. There's a difference. Clara turned to face him fully. Victor's mistake was overplaying his hand. He should have let suspicion simmer. Instead, he turned it into drama, and drama fades. If I can get just a few women on my side, show them I'm not a threat, the narrative starts to shift. That's a big if. I know. But it's better than waiting for Victor's next move. Ethan studied her face in the dim lamplight. You're braver than I gave you credit for. I'm not brave. I'm desperate. There's a difference. I don't think there is. Something passed between them then. Understanding, alliance, the beginning of genuine partnership. They were in this together now, for better or worse. Victor had meant to divide them, to make Clara seem like a liability. Instead, he'd given them common cause. It was, Clara thought, possibly the biggest mistake Victor Hale had ever made. But she wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy. Victor was smart, connected, ruthless. He'd been planning this for who knows how long, and they were starting from a position of weakness, already on the defensive. Still, Clara had survived worse. She'd survived violence and poverty and the slow grind of a world that wanted to break her. She could survive Victor Hale. She had to. Because for the first time in years, she had something worth fighting for. Not just survival, but possibility. A home, a partner, a chance at becoming someone other than the woman she'd been forced to be. And she would burn down anyone who tried to take that away. The week after the town meeting crawled by with excruciating slowness. Clara went about her work on the ranch with mechanical efficiency, but her mind was always turning over the problem of Victor, analyzing his strategy, searching for weaknesses. Ethan had been right about one thing. Victor had money and influence. But Clara had spent enough time around powerful men to know that their strength was often also their greatest vulnerability. The higher they climbed, the harder they fell. On Wednesday morning, she hitched the wagon and drove into town alone. Ethan had protested, worry creasing his face. It's not safe. People are worked up. Which is exactly why I need to go, Clara replied, checking the harness one more time. If I hide on the ranch, it confirms everything Victor said about me, that I'm afraid, that I have something to hide. You do have something to hide. We all do. Then I'll hide it in plain sight. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. Besides, I need supplies. And you need to meet with Tom and the others. Figure out who we can trust. Ethan handed her a list, his fingers lingering on hers just a moment longer than necessary. Be careful. Victor's dangerous when he thinks he's winning. So am I, Clara said, and meant it. The ride into Redemption Springs took 40 minutes. Clara used the time to rehearse what she would say, how she would carry herself. She needed to project confidence without arrogance, openness without desperation. It was a delicate balance, one she'd failed at before. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't alone. The general store was run by a middle-aged woman named Sarah Chen, whose family had emigrated from San Francisco 5 years earlier. Clara had met her briefly during the disastrous town meeting, had noticed how Sarah's expression remained neutral, while others whispered and judged. It wasn't much, but it was something. The store was quiet when Clara entered, the bell above the door announcing her arrival with a cheerful jangle that felt at odds with the tension in her shoulders. Sarah looked up from the counter where she was inventorying fabric bolts. Her face registered surprise, then something more complicated. Mrs. Hale, she said carefully. Didn't expect to see you in town so soon. I needed supplies. Clara handed over the list. And I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For what? For not joining the mob. Sarah's mouth twitched. Wasn't a mob, just concerned citizens. With torches and pitchforks made of gossip. Clara met her eyes directly. You didn't participate. I noticed. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then began gathering items from the shelves. My family knows what it's like to be judged before people know your story. When we first came here, folks assumed all sorts of things. That we didn't speak English, that we practiced strange customs, that we couldn't be trusted. She set a bag of flour on the counter with more force than necessary. Most of it was nonsense, but it stuck anyway for a while. How did you change their minds? Time? Work? Proving ourselves every single day until they couldn't ignore us anymore. Sarah glanced at Clara. And having friends who spoke up for us when we couldn't speak up for ourselves. I don't have friends here. Not yet. The words hung in the air, a tentative offer. Clara felt something loosen in her chest. I'm not what Victor said I am. I'm not a criminal or a con artist. But you're not entirely innocent either, Sarah observed. It wasn't accusatory, just factual. No, I've made mistakes. I've done things I'm not proud of. but I haven't heard anyone except maybe myself. Sarah finished gathering the supplies, her movements efficient and practiced. Victor Hale has a way of making people believe what he wants them to believe. He's been doing it for years, but he also has a way of overreaching, getting too confident. She tallied the purchases. That'll be $4.30. Clara counted out the money carefully. You don't believe him? I didn't say that. I said he overreaches. Sarah wrapped the items in brown paper. Here's what I know. Ethan Hale is a good man. Quiet, keeps to himself, but honest. If he chose you, there's a reason. Whether that reason is love or loneliness or something else entirely, it's his business. She pushed the parcels across the counter. But Clara, if you're planning to stay here, to make a life in this town, you need to understand something. Frontier communities don't forgive easily. We can't afford to. Trust is everything when you're this far from civilization. Then how do I earn it? Same way we did. Time, work, consistency. Sarah paused, and maybe by standing up to Victor when he makes his next move. People respect courage, even when they don't necessarily like the person showing it. Clara gathered her packages. You think he'll make another move? I know he will. Victor doesn't start things he doesn't plan to finish. As Clara turned to leave, Sarah called after her. The Ladies' Auxiliary meets Friday afternoons at the community hall. We do quilting, mostly, but also discuss town matters. You should come. Clara looked back, surprised. You think they'd want me there? I think some of them are more open-minded than others, and I think hiding from them is the worst thing you could do. Sarah's expression was unreadable. Besides, Margaret Holbrook will be there. If you want to understand what you're really up against, you need to understand her. Clara nodded slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Friday might be worse than the town meeting. Outside, Clara loaded the supplies into the wagon, her mind racing. The Ladies' Auxiliary. It was either brilliant or suicidal, she couldn't decide which. But Sarah was right about one thing. Hiding would only confirm guilt. And if Margaret Holbrook was Victor's ally, as seemed likely, then facing her directly might reveal something useful. She was climbing onto the wagon seat when a voice stopped her. Mrs. Hale, a word? Clara turns to find a man approaching, older, with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades in the sun. He wore a suit that had seen better days but was meticulously maintained. She recognized him from the meeting. Judge Morrison, Ethan had said. One of the few men in town who didn't owe Victor favors. Judge, Clara said carefully, I wanted to apologize for Saturday night. Morrison's voice was gruff but sincere. That wasn't justice, that was theater. You're right, it was. Victor's got most of the town believing his version of events, but some of us remember when he was just a kid causing trouble and blaming it on Ethan. The judge shook his head. Brothers shouldn't be enemies, but sometimes blood runs poison instead of thick. You knew them as children? Knew their father, good man John Hale. Worked himself to death building that ranch. Always hoped his sons would run it together. Morrison's expression darkened. Victor had other plans. Sold his share to Ethan for half what it was worth, then moved to town and started making real money. Now he looks at what Ethan has and sees opportunity instead of family. Clara felt pieces clicking into place. He wants the ranch back. More than that, he wants to prove he was right to leave, that Ethan's way of life is dying, that progress and civilization are the future. Morrison met her eyes. And he'll use you to do it. Make Ethan look like a fool, discredit his judgment, maybe even get him declared incompetent. Then the land gets sold, and Victor swoops in with one of his business partners. Can he do that? Get Ethan declared incompetent? If he builds a strong enough case, brings in doctors willing to testify about Ethan's state of mind, gets enough people to say he's been acting erratically, proves that he's putting the community at risk by bringing in someone of questionable character. Morrison shrugged. It's a long shot, but Victor's patient. He'll work on it, chip away, until suddenly it doesn't seem so impossible. Clara's stomach turned. That's why the committee. To legitimize the investigation. Exactly. And Margaret Holbrook chairing it gives it credibility. She's been a pillar of this community for 20 years. Why is she helping him? Morrison's smile was thin. Because Victor's been courting her daughter. Elizabeth Holbrook is 23 and spoiled rotten. And she's convinced Victor Hale is her ticket to a better life. Margaret wants grandchildren and status. Victor's offering both. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than Clara had imagined. This wasn't just about the ranch or about discrediting her. It was about Victor constructing an entire new life, with the legitimacy that came from marrying into the town's most prominent family, with the wealth that would come from selling Ethan's land to the railroad, with the power that came from being the man who brought progress to Redemption Springs. And she and Ethan were just obstacles to be removed. "What do I do?" Clara asked quietly. "You do exactly what Victor doesn't expect. You engage. You show up. You let people see you are not a monster or a criminal, just a woman trying to make a life." Morrison touched his hat brim. "And you document everything. Every conversation with Victor, every accusation, every piece of evidence he presents. Because when this goes to court, and it will go to court eventually, you'll need your own case to present." "Court? This is going to trial?" "Everything goes to trial eventually, Mrs. Hale. That's how civilization works." Morrison's expression was grave. "Question is, will you be the defendant or the plaintiff?" He walked away, leaving Clara standing beside the wagon with her mind reeling. This was bigger than she'd realized, more dangerous. Victor wasn't just trying to humiliate her or isolate Ethan. He was building a legal case, brick by brick, that could end with Ethan losing everything. She drove home in a daze, the landscape blurring past. When she reached the ranch, she found Ethan in the barn with Tom, Miguel, and two other men she didn't recognize. They all looked up as she entered, conversation dying. "Clara," Ethan said, tension evident in his voice. "You're back. Any trouble in town?" "Depends on your definition of trouble." Clara set down her packages. "We need to talk. All of us." Over the next hour, she relayed everything. Her conversation with Sarah Chen, Judge Morrison's warning, the implications of Margaret Holbrook's involvement. The men listened in grim silence. When she finished, Tom was the first to speak. "I knew Victor was a snake, but this—" He shook his head. "Going after family like this, it ain't right." "Right doesn't enter into it," one of the other men said. His name was James Fletcher, and he ran a smaller spread east of Ethan's property. "Victor's been eyeing land all along this corridor ever since the railroad plans were announced, my place included. He's made offers, very generous offers, but with strings attached." "What kind of strings?" Ethan asked. "The kind that give him control even after you sell. First refusal on water rights, easements for his businesses, shares in any future development." Fletcher's jaw tightened. "He's building an empire, and he doesn't care who he steps on to do it." Miguel spoke up, his accent more pronounced when he was angry. "So we fight. We show the town what he really is." "How?" Clara asked. "He's spent years building his reputation. We can't tear that down in a few weeks." "No," Ethan said slowly, "but we can make people question it, make them see the pattern." He looked at Clara. "You said Sarah Chen invited you to the ladies' auxiliary meeting?" "Yes." "Then you go, and you listen. See what the women are saying, what concerns they have. Because here's what I've learned about this town. The men might make the official decisions, but the women shape the opinions that drive those decisions." The other rancher, a taciturn man named Robert Graves, nodded. "My wife's in the auxiliary. She'll look out for you. Won't make a fuss about it, but she'll make sure you're treated fair." "Why would she do that?" Clara asked. "Because she doesn't like Margaret Holbrook," Graves said with a slight smile. "An enemy of her enemy and all that." They spent another hour planning. Tom would quietly spread word among the ranch hands in the area, gauge sentiment, see who could be trusted. Fletcher and Graves would talk to the other small landowners, the ones Victor had approached with his predatory offers. Miguel would keep his ear to the ground in the Mexican quarter of town, where information flowed differently than in the white establishments. And Ethan would meet with Judge Morrison to understand the legal landscape. As for Clara, she would do the hardest thing of all. She would face the women of Redemption Springs and convince them she wasn't the villain Victor had painted her to be. Friday came too quickly. Clara dressed with care, choosing her Philadelphia dress, the one she'd been saving for special occasions. It was outdated by Eastern standards, but still far superior to anything worn in Redemption Springs. She wanted to project refinement without arrogance, capability without threat. It was a narrow line to walk. Ethan drove her into town, his presence a silent support. At the community hall steps, he touched her hand. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. If it gets bad, it will get bad, Clara interrupted. But I'll survive it. I always do. He looked like he wanted to say more, but she was already climbing down, already steeling herself for what was to come. The community hall's front room was set up with quilting frames and chairs in a rough circle. A dozen women were already there, their conversation dropping to whispers as Clara entered. Sarah Chen looked up from her stitching and nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement. Robert Graves's wife, a sturdy woman named Helen, did the same. But the rest of the women watched Clara with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. And at the head of the circle sat Margaret Holbrook, queenly in her bearing, her eyes sharp as she assessed the new arrival. "Mrs. Hale," Margaret said, her voice carrying a chill. "What a surprise." "Mrs. Chen invited me," Clara replied evenly. "I hope that's all right." The auxiliary is open to all women of good character. The emphasis on the last two words was subtle but unmistakable. "Please, sit. We were just discussing the upcoming harvest festival." Clara found a seat between Sarah and Helen, acutely aware of the empty chair that separated them from the rest of the circle. It might as well have been a wall. The conversation resumed, but it was stilted now, performative. The women were talking to each other but performing for Clara, testing to see how she would react. For 20 minutes, Clara stitched in silence, letting the rhythm of the work calm her nerves. She'd learned quilting from her mother back before everything fell apart, and the familiar motion of needle through fabric was meditative. Around her, the conversation drifted from the festival to gardens to children to the price of flour. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice deceptively casual. "I understand there was some unpleasantness at the general store earlier this week." Clara's hands stilled. "I'm not aware of any unpleasantness. I purchased supplies and left." "Really? Because I heard from several sources that you confronted Sarah." Margaret's smile was thin. "Made some rather inflammatory accusations about the town meeting." "I didn't confront anyone," Sarah interjected quietly. "We had a conversation, a pleasant one." "Is that what we're calling it now?" Margaret set down her quilting. "Ladies, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Mrs. Hale Clara has joined us today, and while I appreciate her interest in our community, I think we all have questions." "I'm happy to answer them," Clara said, proud of how steady her voice remained. "Excellent." Margaret's expression was all false warmth. "Then perhaps you can clarify some of the concerns raised at the town meeting. These allegations about your past, about your husband's death, are they true?" "My husband died in an accident. I was investigated and cleared of any wrongdoing. But there were questions." "There are always questions when someone dies young. That doesn't make them valid." "And yet you left Philadelphia quite suddenly." Margaret's eyes were laser-focused. "Abandoned your debts, from what I understand." Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I left because I had no other choice. The factory where I worked closed. I lost my income and couldn't afford the boarding house. Mrs. Morrison, my landlady, was understanding at the time. Whatever she told Victor Hale has been twisted to serve his purposes." "Victor's purposes?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Victor is simply concerned for his brother's welfare, as any good family member would be." "Victor is concerned with Victor's interests," Clara shot back. "And if you can't see that, Mrs. Holbrook, then you're not as perceptive as I have been told you are." The circle went silent. Several women gasped. Helen Graves made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Margaret's face hardened. "That's quite an accusation." "It's an observation. Victor stood in front of the entire town and questioned my character without offering a single piece of verifiable evidence. He implied criminality without making specific accusations. He manipulated people's fears and prejudices to serve his agenda." Clara set down her quilting, meeting Margaret's gaze directly. "And he's using you to legitimize it. This committee he's proposed with you as chair, it's not about protecting the community. It's about giving him official sanction to destroy his brother's reputation." "That's absurd," Margaret said, but something flickered in her eyes. "Is it? Tell me, Mrs. Holbrook, what exactly are you investigating? What specific crimes am I accused of? What evidence will you be examining? Or is this committee just an excuse to dig through my past until you find something, anything, that can be used against me. We have a responsibility to ensure the safety of our community. From what? From a woman who's done nothing but work hard and mind her own business? Clara leaned forward. I understand why you're helping Victor. Your daughter is courting him. You see an alliance that benefits your family. But ask yourself, what kind of man deliberately destroys his own brother? What kind of man uses gossip and innuendo as weapons? Is that really the man you want tied to your family? Margaret stood abruptly. I think this meeting is over. We've barely started, Helen Graves said mildly. And I, for one, would like to hear more of what Clara has to say. She's making wild accusations. She's asking fair questions, Sarah interjected. Questions some of us have been thinking but haven't said out loud. Margaret looked around the circle and seemed to realize she was losing control of the narrative. Fine, let her speak, but I won't sit here and listen to slander against a respected member of our community. She swept out, two of her closest allies following, but the rest of the women remained, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to intrigued. Clara felt her heart hammering, aware that she'd just made a very dangerous enemy. But she'd also done something else. She'd shown these women that she wasn't afraid. The meeting continued for another hour, the atmosphere lighter without Margaret's dominating presence. Clara answered questions honestly, about Philadelphia, about her marriage, about her reasons for coming west. She didn't hide her past or pretend to be something she wasn't. And slowly, gradually, some of the women began to warm to her. Helen told a story about her own arrival in Redemption Springs 15 years earlier, how she'd been viewed with suspicion because she'd come from a mining camp rather than a respectable eastern city. Sarah shared her family's struggles with discrimination and how they'd eventually earned acceptance through persistence and integrity. Another woman, younger, admitted that she'd been a dance hall girl before marrying her husband, and the town had never quite forgiven her for it. By the time the meeting ended, Clara didn't have friends exactly, but she had something more valuable: witnesses. Women who'd seen her respond to hostility with dignity, who'd heard her tell the truth even when it wasn't flattering, who'd watched her refuse to be cowed by Margaret Holbrook's intimidation. Sarah walked her out to the wagon. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Clara admitted. Margaret will retaliate. She doesn't forgive public challenges. I know, but I couldn't sit there and let her control the narrative. No, Sarah agreed. I suppose you couldn't. She paused. For what it's worth, you have more support than you realize. Not everyone in this town is under Victor's spell. How many? Enough. Sarah smiled slightly. Or at least enough to make things interesting. Clara drove home as the sun lowered toward the horizon, her hands shaking on the reins. She'd survived the auxiliary meeting, but at what cost? She'd made an enemy of the most powerful woman in town. She'd drawn battle lines that couldn't be erased, but she'd also shown them she wouldn't be broken. And in a frontier town where strength was valued above almost everything else, that counted for something. When she reached the ranch, Ethan was waiting on the porch. One look at her face, and he came down the steps. How bad was it? I confronted Margaret Holbrook, accused Victor of manipulating her, made her look foolish in front of the other women. Clara climbed down from the wagon. So, yeah, pretty bad. To her surprise, Ethan laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. That's my girl. The casual endearment caught her off guard, warming her despite the cold evening air. You're not angry? Angry? Clara, you did exactly what needed doing. Margaret's been running this town like her personal fiefdom for years. Someone needed to stand up to her. Victor won't take this well. No, Ethan agreed, his expression sobering. He won't. Which means we need to be ready for whatever he does next. They went inside together, and over dinner, Clara recounted the meeting in detail. Ethan listened intently, occasionally asking questions, his tactical mind already analyzing the new landscape. Helen Graves is a good ally to have, he said. Robert trusts her completely, and she has her own network of friends. If she's speaking favorably about you, others will listen. But Margaret has more influence. For now. But influence is fragile. One wrong move and it shatters. Ethan pushed his plate away. Judge Morrison sent word. The committee Victor proposed has been officially formed. First meeting is Monday. They're calling you to testify. Clara's appetite disappeared. What kind of testimony? About your past. About your relationship with your late husband. About why you came west. Ethan reached across the table, taking her hand. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be there with you. They won't let you in the room, not if I'm the one being investigated. Then we'll prepare you, go over every possible question, every potential trap. You've already proven you can hold your own against Margaret. This is just more of the same. But it wasn't the same, and they both knew it. This was official now, sanctioned. If the committee found against her, it would give Victor exactly what he needed, documented proof that Clara was unsuitable, that Ethan's judgment was compromised, that intervention was necessary. That night, Clara lay awake long after Ethan had gone to his room. Through the thin walls, she could hear him moving around, restless. They were both trapped in the same nightmare, waiting for Victor's next move, knowing it would come, but not knowing when or how. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Storm weather coming. The prairie had a way of reflecting human drama, calm one moment, violent the next, with no warning in between. Clara closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but all she could see was Victor's smile, sharp and knowing. He'd anticipated her move today. He'd known she would fight back, and he'd already prepared his counter. The committee hearing was just the next phase of his plan. But Clara had learned something important from the women at the auxiliary meeting. She'd learned that power wasn't always about who had the most money or influence. Sometimes it was about who was willing to stand longest under pressure, who refused to break. Victor wanted her to run. He wanted her to collapse under scrutiny, to prove his accusations true by fleeing. So she would do the opposite. She would stay, she would testify. She would look that committee in the eye and tell them the truth, every ugly bit of it. And she would make Victor work for his victory every single step of the way. Because if she was going down, she was taking him with her. The weekend passed in tense preparation. Ethan and Clara sat at the kitchen table for hours, going over every detail of her life in Philadelphia, anticipating questions the committee might ask, rehearsing answers that were truthful but not self-incriminating. Judge Morrison stopped by Saturday afternoon with copies of the committee's charter and procedural rules, such as they were. It's not a court of law, Morrison explained, spreading the papers across the table. But Margaret's trying to make it look like one. She's brought in a stenographer from the county seat, hired a lawyer to advise the committee on proper procedures. Victor's financing all of it naturally. Can they compel me to answer? Clara asked. Not legally, but refusing to answer will be seen as evidence of guilt. It's a trap either way. Morrison looked at her seriously. Your best bet is complete honesty. Tell them everything, even the ugly parts. Don't give them anything to discover later that contradicts your testimony. Everything? Claire's voice was tight. Everything. The investigation into your husband's death, the unpaid debts, why you really came west. All of it. Morrison leaned back. I know it's hard, but lies of omission will destroy you faster than any truth. After he left, Clara stood at the window watching the sun set, her arms wrapped around herself. Ethan came up behind her, close but not touching. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. We've been over this. I know. But Clara, if you want to leave, if you want to take the train east and start over somewhere else, I'd understand. I'd help you. Give you money, references, whatever you need. She turned to face him. Is that what you want? For me to leave? No. The word came out fierce. But I won't trap you here. Won't make you face this if you don't want to. Clara studied his face in the fading light. Somewhere over the past weeks, Ethan Hale had become more than just a means of escape. He'd become a partner, an ally, maybe even something more, though neither of them had named it yet. I'm not leaving, she said. Not unless you want me gone. I don't. Then we do this together. He nodded, and for a moment they stood there, the space between them charged with unspoken words. Then Ethan reached out, gently tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, in a way their relationship hadn't been before. Whatever happens Monday, he said, you should know something. I don't regret bringing you here. Even if Victor succeeds, even if we lose everything, I don't regret it. Clara's throat tightened. Neither do I. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara didn't feel alone. Not completely. Monday morning dawned cold and clear. Clara dressed in her best clothes again, pinned her hair with extra care, and forced herself to eat breakfast, though her stomach rebelled against every bite. Ethan was silent across the table, his face set in hard lines. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the town hall. They arrived 15 minutes early to find a crowd already gathered outside. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns, and half of Redemption Springs had turned out to watch the spectacle. Clara felt their eyes on her as she climbed down from the wagon, heard the whispers start immediately. Ethan offered his arm and she took it, drawing strength from his solid presence. Together they walked through the crowd, heads high, refusing to show fear. Inside, the main hall had been arranged like a courtroom. A long table at the front for the committee, with Margaret Holbrook at its center, flanked by 4 other prominent citizens. Chairs for witnesses. A stenographer's desk off to the side where a severe-looking woman was already setting up her equipment, and rows of benches for observers, already filling rapidly. Victor stood near the front, dressed impeccably as always, talking quietly with Margaret. He looked up as Clara and Ethan entered, and his smile was all triumph. "Brother," he called out, "Mrs. Hale, thank you for coming." "As if we had a choice," Ethan said coldly. "Oh, you always have choices. That's what this is about, really. The choices Clara made, and whether those choices reflect the kind of character we want in our community." Victor's tone was pleasant, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather rather than destroying lives. Judge Morrison appeared at Clara's elbow. "Don't engage with him. Save everything for the testimony." They took seats in the front row. Clara's hands were shaking, so she folded them tightly in her lap. Around them, the hall continued to fill. She spotted Sarah Chen near the back, Helen Graves with her husband in the middle section. Tom and Miguel standing against the wall, their expressions grim. And scattered throughout, faces both familiar and strange, all watching, waiting to see her fall. At precisely 10 o'clock, Margaret rapped a gavel on the table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. "This committee will come to order. We are here today to investigate allegations regarding Mrs. Clara Hale, concerning her background, character, and suitability as a member of our community." Margaret's voice was formal, measured. "Mrs. Hale, please come forward." Clara stood, her legs steady despite the terror coursing through her. She walked to the witness chair and sat, very aware of every eye in the room fixed on her. "State your full name for the record," Margaret instructed. "Clara Elizabeth Whitmore Hale. Your age?" 26. Place of birth? Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The questioning continued, innocuous at first. Margaret established basic facts: Clara's education, her family background, the death of her parents when she was 19. Then the tone shifted. "Tell us about your marriage to Harold Whitmore." Clara had prepared for this. "We married when I was 21. He worked as a clerk in my father's shipping office." "And how long were you married before his death?" 3 years. "Describe the circumstances of his death." Clara took a breath. "Harold had a drinking problem. It got worse over time. The night he died, he'd been at a tavern. He fell down a flight of stairs and broke his neck. The coroner ruled it an accidental death." "But there was an investigation," Margaret prompted. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was a young widow and Harold had been violent toward me during our marriage. The police wanted to ensure I hadn't contributed to his death." A murmur ran through the crowd. Margaret raised the gavel. "Order. Mrs. Hale, you're saying your late husband was violent?" "Yes. He struck me on multiple occasions. The last time, 3 weeks before he died, he broke my collarbone." "Do you have proof of this?" "I was treated by a doctor. The record should still exist." "Should," Margaret repeated. "But you didn't bring them with you." I didn't know I'd need to defend myself against accusations of murder," Clara said, keeping her voice level. "No one's accusing you of murder," Victor interjected smoothly from his seat. "We're simply trying to understand the full picture." "Mr. Hale, please," Margaret said, though her tone was indulgent. "Let the witness continue. Mrs. Hale, what were the results of the police investigation?" "They found no evidence of foul play. I was cleared completely." "And yet you left Philadelphia shortly after." "Not shortly after. A year and a half later, after I'd lost my job and couldn't afford to stay. Leaving behind debts." Clara's jaw tightened. "I owed 3 months' rent to my landlady. I fully intended to pay her back when I was able." "But you never did." "I've been here less than a month. I haven't had the opportunity." Margaret made a note. Let's talk about why you came west. You answered an advertisement placed by Ethan Hale seeking a wife. Why? Because I needed a fresh start. Because I was drowning in Philadelphia and saw no other way out. So you married a stranger for financial security. I married a man who offered me respect and partnership. Yes, financial security was part of it. I won't apologize for wanting to survive. No one's asking you to apologize, Margaret said, though her tone suggested otherwise. We're simply trying to establish your motivations. You were desperate, in debt, possibly suspected of involvement in your husband's death. I was cleared, Clara interrupted. Cleared but not entirely innocent in the eyes of your community. So you fled west and secured marriage to a wealthy landowner. Can you understand why that might raise questions? Ethan's not wealthy. He's a working rancher. He owns 500 acres of prime grazing land near a soon-to-be-established railroad line. That makes him one of the most valuable prospects in the territory. Margaret leaned forward. Did you know about the railroad before you came here? Clara hesitated, understanding the trap too late. I'd heard rumors. So you knew Ethan's land would increase significantly in value. That wasn't why I came. But it was a factor. No. Mrs. Hale, please be honest with this committee. You were desperate, destitute, and possibly facing renewed suspicion in Philadelphia. You saw an opportunity to secure your future by marrying a man with valuable property. Isn't that the truth? No, Clara said firmly. I came here because Ethan's letters were kind, because he offered me dignity when I'd had none for years, because I thought maybe, just maybe, I could build something real here. The land, the money, none of that mattered to me. How convenient that you expect us to believe that. I don't care what you believe, Clara shot back. I know the truth. Margaret's expression hardened. Your attitude isn't helping your case. My case? I thought this was an investigation, not a trial. It's whatever we determine it needs to be. Margaret glanced at her notes. Let's discuss your behavior since arriving in Redemption Springs. You've been confrontational with several prominent citizens, including myself. You've made accusations against Victor Hale, a respected businessman. You've isolated yourself on the ranch rather than integrating into the community. Does this sound like someone who wants to be part of our town? I've been confrontational with people who've prejudged me without evidence, Clara said. I've questioned Victor's motives because his behavior suggests ulterior motives. And I've been working on the ranch because that's what I came here to do. If that makes me unsuitable, then your standards are impossible to meet. Perhaps they are, Margaret said quietly. Perhaps that's the point. The admission hung in the air, stunning in its honesty. Margaret had just revealed what Clara had suspected all along. This wasn't about finding the truth. It was about exclusion, about protecting the established order from outsiders who didn't fit the mold. Judge Morrison stood abruptly. Mrs. Holbrook, that statement is highly inappropriate for a supposedly impartial investigation. Sit down, Judge, Margaret said. You're not part of this committee. No, but I am an officer of the court, and what you're doing here is a mockery of justice. We're not a court. Then stop pretending to be one, Morrison's voice carried across the hall. You've already decided Clara's guilty. This entire proceeding is a predetermined conclusion designed to give Victor legal cover for whatever he's planning. Victor stood, his composure cracking slightly. Judge Morrison, those are serious accusations. Are they? Then tell everyone here, Victor. Tell them what you really want. Tell them about your plans for the railroad, about the land deals you've been negotiating, about how Ethan's ranch is the last piece you need to complete your scheme. The hall erupted in noise. People shouting questions, demanding explanations. Margaret hammered her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. But the damage was done. Morrison had shifted the narrative, turned the spotlight from Clara to Victor. Clara saw the fury in Victor's eyes, quickly masked, saw Margaret's panic as she realized she'd lost control of the hearing, and saw Ethan, standing now, his hand on Morrison's shoulder in solidarity. This hearing is adjourned, Margaret announced loudly. We'll reconvene. No, Clara said, standing. Her voice wasn't loud, but something in it cut through the chaos. No, we're not done here. The room gradually quieted. Clara stepped forward, placing herself directly in front of the committee table. You want to know who I am? Fine, I'll tell you. I'm a woman who survived an abusive marriage, who watched her husband drink himself to death and felt relieved instead of sad, who worked in a factory for starvation wages because it was better than starving on the street, who answered an advertisement from a stranger because she had nothing left to lose. Her voice was steady, clear. I'm not perfect. I'm not some innocent victim. I made hard choices, did things I'm not proud of, survived however I could. But I'm not a criminal. I'm not a con artist. I'm just someone who wanted a chance at a better life. She turned to face the crowd. And if that makes me unsuitable for your town, if survival is a crime here, then this isn't a place worth being anyway. Silence. Then, from the back, someone started clapping. Clara looked up to see Sarah Chen on her feet, applauding. Helen Graves joined her. Then Tom and Miguel. Then others scattered throughout the hall until nearly half the room was standing and clapping. The other half remained seated, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable to hostile. The town was dividing before her eyes, choosing sides. Margaret's face was pale with fury. This hearing is adjourned. The committee will deliberate and release our findings within the week. You do that, Judge Morrison said, and I'll be filing a formal complaint about your conduct with the territorial authorities. As people began filing out, Clara felt a hand on her arm. She turned to find Ethan there, his eyes bright with something that looked like pride. You were magnificent, he said quietly. I just told the truth. That's what made it magnificent. Outside, clusters of people stood arguing. Clara saw Margaret in heated conversation with Victor, their body language tense. Saw the town splitting into factions, those who believed her, those who didn't, and those who were still undecided. Sarah Chen approached with Helen Graves and several other women from the auxiliary. That took courage, Sarah said. Real courage. Or stupidity, Clara replied. Same thing sometimes. Helen smiled slightly. My husband's talking to the other ranchers, Fletcher, Morrison, the Johnsons. They're discussing options if Margaret's committee rules against you. What kind of options? The legal kind. Challenging the committee's authority, filing countersuits, making enough noise that the territorial governor has to get involved. Helen glanced toward where Victor stood. Victor Hale's been operating in the shadows for too long. Time someone dragged him into the light. They were interrupted by a commotion near the street. Clara looked up to see a rider coming in fast, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up in front of the town hall and jumped down, looking around frantically. Where's Ethan Hale? He shouted. Ethan pushed through the crowd. I'm here. What's wrong? Fire, the rider gasped. Your ranch. The barn's burning. The world seemed to stop. Clara felt ice flood her veins. Ethan's face went white. When? He demanded. Started maybe 30 minutes ago. Tom sent me. They're trying to contain it, but... The rider shook his head. It's bad, Ethan. Real bad. Ethan was already moving, running toward their wagon. Clara followed, her mind reeling. Fire, the barn, all their supplies, their feed for the animals. Everything they'd worked for. Wait! Judge Morrison called out. Ethan? Wait! Ethan spun around. My ranch is burning. I know. And that's convenient, isn't it? Morrison looked at Victor, who stood frozen, his expression carefully neutral. Very convenient timing. Right in the middle of a hearing that was going badly for you. Are you suggesting I had something to do with this? Victor's voice was cold. I'm suggesting it's suspicious. Fire breaks out at your brother's ranch on the exact day his wife is being investigated. What are the odds? Coincidence. Like hell it is, Ethan snarled. He took a step toward Victor, fists clenched. If you did this, if you sent someone to my property, you'll what? Assault me in front of half the town? Victor spread his hands. I've been here all morning, Ethan. Witnesses everywhere. Whatever's happening at your ranch, I had nothing to do with it. He's right, Clara said quietly, putting a hand on Ethan's arm. He's been here. We all saw him. Doesn't mean he didn't arrange it, Ethan growled. Prove it, Victor challenged. Prove I had anything to do with this fire. Later, Morrison interjected. Right now, get to your ranch. Save what you can. We'll sort out blame after. Ethan and Clara ran for the wagon. As they pulled away, Clara looked back and saw Victor watching them, his face a careful mask. But his eyes held something that made her blood run cold. Satisfaction. The ride back to the ranch took forever and no time at all. They crested the rise and Clara saw smoke billowing into the clear sky, thick and black. The barn was fully engulfed, flames leaping high. Tom and Miguel were there with several other men, forming a bucket brigade from the well, but it was clearly futile. The barn was lost. Ethan leaped from the wagon before it fully stopped, running toward the chaos. Clara followed, her mind cataloging losses. The tack, the feed, the equipment, months of work and preparation, gone. "The animals!" Ethan shouted at Tom. "Got them out," Tom called back, his face black with soot. "Horses are in the far corral, cattle scattered but alive. We were lucky. Miguel smelled smoke before it got too far." "How did it start?" Miguel appeared beside them, coughing. "Don't know. Started in the hayloft, spread fast. Too fast." Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. Too fast meant accelerant, meant arson. They worked for hours, containing the fire, keeping it from spreading to the house and other buildings. By the time the barn finally collapsed into itself, a smoldering ruin, Clara was exhausted, covered in soot and ash, her hands blistered from the bucket chains. Ethan stood staring at the wreckage, his face hollow. Clara came to stand beside him. "We'll rebuild," she said. "With what?" "The barn held everything. Our supplies for winter, the equipment I need for spring planting. I don't have money to replace it all." "Then we'll find it. We." Ethan turned to her. "Clara, you don't have to stay. This isn't your fight anymore. Victor's made his move. He's destroyed my livelihood. Without that barn, without the supplies, I can't work the ranch properly. I'll have to sell, probably to him at whatever price he offers." "No." "Clara, all?" I said no. She grabbed his arms, forcing him to look at her. "I'm not running. Not from this. Not from Victor. Not from anything. We fight. We prove he did this, and we make him pay." "How?" "He covered his tracks. He always does." Clara looked at the smoking ruins, her mind working. Victor had been at the hearing, yes, but someone had set this fire. Someone he'd paid or coerced or manipulated, and people who could be bought once could be bought twice. "We find whoever did this," she said. "We find them and we make them talk." "And if they won't?" "Then we make them." Clara's voice was hard. "I've survived worse than Victor Hale. We both have, and I'll be damned if I let him win by making me afraid." Ethan studied her face in the fading light, seeing something there that made him straighten. "All right, we fight." That night, they salvaged what they could from the ruins. The next morning, Tom brought news from town. The committee had reached its decision faster than expected. They were recommending that Clara be placed under official observation, with Margaret Holbrook appointed as her supervisor. Any business transactions, property transfers, or legal actions would require Margaret's approval. It was worse than a conviction. It was supervised surrender, Victor's way of controlling Ethan through Clara. "There has to be a legal challenge," Clara said to Judge Morrison when he arrived with the news. "This can't be enforceable." "It's not law," Morrison agreed, "but it carries weight. And with the fire happening right after the hearing, Victor's going to argue it proves you're a destabilizing influence, that Ethan needs protection from your bad luck. Bad luck he manufactured. Which we need to prove." Morrison looked at the barn wreckage. "I've got friends investigating quietly. Someone saw something, talked to someone. We'll find the thread and pull it." But days passed without progress. Ethan had to sell cattle to buy emergency supplies. The men who'd stood with them at the hearing grew quiet, worried about their own properties. And Victor's influence seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Then, on Friday, Miguel came to the house just after dawn, his face urgent. "I found something," he said. "Someone who'll talk. But it has to be now, before Victor knows." Clara and Ethan followed him to a shack on the edge of town where a man Clara vaguely recognized from the saloon sat hunched and nervous. His name was Jeremiah Knox, a drifter who did odd jobs for cash. "Tell them," Miguel urged. Knox wouldn't meet their eyes. "Victor Hale paid me $50 to set the fire. Gave me lamp oil, told me exactly when to do it, when the hearing would keep everyone distracted." Clara's heart hammered. "You'll testify to this?" "I ain't testifying to nothing. I'm telling you because Miguel's got something on me, and I owe him. But I ain't facing Victor in court. Man like that, he'd make me disappear." "We'll protect you," Ethan said. Knox laughed bitterly. "You can't even protect yourself." He was right, and they all knew it. But this was the evidence they needed, the proof that Victor had orchestrated everything. Then we record it, Clara said suddenly. Get it written down, signed, witnessed. No, Knox stood. I'm leaving the territory, getting as far from Victor Hale as I can. You want him, you find another way. He left before they could stop him. Clara wanted to scream with frustration. They'd been so close. There'll be others, Miguel said. Victor's hired men before. Someone else will talk. But Clara wasn't so sure. Victor was too careful, too calculating. He wouldn't leave loose ends that could unravel him, unless she gave him a reason to overreach, to get so confident that he made a mistake. An idea began forming in her mind, dangerous and desperate. She looked at Ethan, at the exhaustion in his face, the defeat starting to creep into his eyes. She thought about the barn, the hearing, the systematic destruction Victor was inflicting, and she made a decision. I'm going to talk to Victor, she said. Absolutely not, Ethan said immediately. He's won, Ethan, or he thinks he has. Which means he's vulnerable. He'll want to gloat to explain how clever he's been, and when he does, he might reveal something we can use. It's too dangerous. Everything's dangerous now. Clara met his eyes. Trust me. After a long moment, Ethan nodded. I'm coming with you. No, he won't talk if you're there. It has to be just me. Clara, trust me, she repeated. They arranged it through channels, a message sent to Victor's office requesting a private meeting. He responded immediately, suggesting the hotel restaurant at noon. Public enough to be proper, private enough to speak candidly. Clara dressed carefully, armor of respectability. When she walked into the hotel dining room, Victor was already there, sitting at a corner table with a glass of whiskey and that damned smile. Clara, he said, standing, I'm surprised you asked to meet. Are you? She sat without waiting for him to pull out her chair. I think we both know it's time to discuss terms. Victor's smile widened. Terms. How pragmatic of you. I'm nothing if not practical, Mr. Hale. You've made it clear that you'll destroy Ethan piece by piece until you get what you want. The barn was just the beginning. I had nothing to do with that fire. We both know that's a lie. But it doesn't matter. You've created the narrative you want, that I'm a destabilizing influence, that Ethan needs to be saved from me, and you'll keep escalating until you force him to sell the ranch. You're very perceptive. So let's stop dancing around it. Clara leaned forward. What's your price? What would it take for you to leave us alone? Victor studied her, calculation in his eyes. Are you offering to leave Ethan? I'm offering to negotiate. Interesting. Victor signaled the waiter for another drink. Here's what I find fascinating about you, Clara. You're a survivor. You do what's necessary, ethics be damned. That's not an insult, it's an observation. We're alike in that way. We're nothing alike, aren't we? You married Ethan for security. I'm maneuvering for land and position. We're both willing to use people to get what we need. Clara forced herself to stay calm. What do you want, Victor? I want my brother's ranch. I want him to finally admit that I was right, that leaving was the smart choice, that his precious, simple life was a fantasy. Victor's smile hardened. And I want you to help me get it. Why would I do that? Because I'll make you rich. Help me convince Ethan to sell. Play the dutiful wife who realizes ranch life is too hard, who wants comfort and civilization, and I'll give you 10% of the profit. That's about $5,000, Clara. Enough to start over anywhere you want, enough to never be desperate again. So there it was. The real offer, the actual trap. Victor wasn't trying to drive her away. He was trying to buy her betrayal. And if I refuse, Clara asked, then things get worse. The barn was just property. But accidents can happen to people too. Ranch work is dangerous. Ethan could get hurt. You could get hurt. Or perhaps more legal troubles. Imagine if evidence surfaced that you really did have something to do with your husband's death. An anonymous tip to Philadelphia authorities, new witnesses who remember things differently. You'd frame me for murder. I'd reveal the truth that was always there, just needed the right lens to see it through. Clara felt sick. This was the real Victor Hale, not the charming businessman or concerned brother, but the monster underneath, the man who would destroy anyone who stood between him and what he wanted. I need to think about it, she said. Of course. Take your time. Victor pulled out his pocket watch. Let's say 48 hours. After that, I make my next move. And I promise you, Clara, you won't like what comes next." She left the restaurant on shaking legs, Victor's words echoing in her mind. Outside, Ethan was waiting with the wagon, his face tight with worry. "What did he say?" Clara told him everything as they drove home. Watched his face go from shock to fury to something colder. "He threatened to hurt you," Ethan said flatly, "to frame you for murder." "Yes." "Then we go to Judge Morrison, get you protection, file charges. With what evidence? Victor's too smart to have said those things where anyone else could hear. It's my word against his, and the town already thinks I'm a liar." "Then what do we do?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, the pieces fitting together in her mind. "We give him what he wants? Or we make him think we are?" "What?" "Victor's weakness is his confidence. He thinks he's already won, that I'm so desperate I'll betray you for money. So we let him believe that. We stage a fight, make the town think we're falling apart. I'll go back to Victor and tell him I'll help. And when he makes his move, when he's certain of victory, that's when we spring the trap." "What trap?" Ethan demanded. "We don't have evidence. We don't have witnesses willing to testify. Not yet. But Victor will provide them." Clara turned to face him. He can't resist explaining how clever he's been. He'll brag, give details, probably incriminate himself if he thinks the audience is friendly. And if we're very lucky, he'll do it in front of someone who matters. This is insane. It's the only play we have left. Clara grabbed his hand. "Ethan, I know it's risky. I know you have to trust me completely. But I swear to you, I am not leaving. I am not betraying you. And I will make Victor Hale pay for everything he's done." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, searching her face. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, we do this your way. But Clara, if anything goes wrong, if you're in danger, then you get me out. That's the deal." She squeezed his hand. "Partners? Partners," he agreed. That night they planned. The next morning they staged their first public argument, loud enough for Miguel to overhear and spread word. Clara accused Ethan of risking everything for pride. Ethan accused her of being a quitter. They played their roles perfectly, and by noon the whole territory was talking about the Hales' marriage falling apart. By evening, Clara had a message from Victor. "Come see me tomorrow. We'll finalize our arrangement." She read the note twice, her hand steady despite the fear coursing through her. This was it, the beginning of the end. One way or another, the game with Victor Hale was about to conclude, and Clara Whitmore Hale intended to be the one left standing when the dust cleared. Clara arrived at Victor's office the next afternoon wearing defeat like a costume. She'd practiced in front of the mirror that morning, slumped shoulders, downcast eyes, the body language of surrender. Ethan had watched from the doorway, his face tight with worry, despite knowing it was an act. "You're sure about this?" he'd asked for the 10th time. "No, but we're doing it anyway." She'd kissed him then, quick and fierce, surprised by her own boldness. "Trust me." Now she sat across from Victor in his well-appointed office, all dark wood and leather, designed to intimidate. Through the window behind him, she could see Main Street, the ordinary life of Redemption Springs continuing while her world hung in balance. "You look tired," Victor observed, pouring 2 glasses of brandy, though it was barely past noon. "I am tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being judged." Clara accepted the glass, let her hand tremble slightly. "You were right. I married Ethan for security, and now that security is gone. The fire was unfortunate. Oh, the fire was arson, and we both know it." She met his eyes. "But I'm past caring about that. I just want this to end." Victor leaned back, satisfaction written across his face. "So you'll help me convince Ethan to sell?" "I'll try, but he's stubborn. He won't listen if he thinks I'm betraying him." Clara took a sip of brandy, forced herself not to cough at the burn. "I need something from you first. Proof that you'll keep your end of the bargain." "You want the money up front?" "No, I want insurance. Something that guarantees you won't just discard me once you have what you want." She paused. "I want documentation of your other land acquisitions, the deals you've made, the methods you've used. If they're all legitimate, you'll have nothing to worry about. But if they're not..." Victor's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like blackmail." "It's protection, for both of us." Clara kept her voice steady. "You get the ranch, I get security. But we both need insurance, the other won't talk. For a long moment, Victor studied her. Clara could see him calculating, weighing risks and benefits. Then slowly, he smiled. You really are just like me, practical to the core. He stood, moving to a safe behind a painting on the wall. All right, I'll show you my insurance, you'll show me yours. Mutually assured destruction, the best kind of partnership. Clara's heart hammered as Victor worked the combination. This was the gamble, that his arrogance would override his caution, that he'd want to prove how clever he'd been. Judge Morrison was positioned outside the building with Tom, ready to respond if things went wrong. But everything depended on Victor incriminating himself clearly enough to matter. The safe opened. Victor pulled out a leather folder bulging with papers. 3 years of acquisitions, he said, setting it on the desk between them. 20 properties, all obtained through perfectly legal means, though the methods of persuasion weren't always conventional. Clara opened the folder with hands that only shook a little. Inside were contracts, correspondence, lists of payments. She scanned quickly, looking for anything usable. There, a letter discussing the fire at the Fletcher property last year, insurance complications. Another detailing payments to railroad officials for route information. A third outlining a plan to contaminate the Morrison well to force a sale. It was all here. Every scheme, every manipulation documented with Victor's signature. You kept records of everything, she said, genuinely shocked. Insurance, Victor replied. If anyone ever came after me, I'd have proof that others were involved too. The railroad officials, the county assessor, even Margaret Holbrook's late husband. He helped with several transactions before he died. Everyone's complicit, which means everyone stays quiet. Brilliant, Clara murmured, and meant it in the worst way possible. But what's to stop me from taking this to the authorities? Because you'd implicate yourself. I have your letters to Ethan, Clara, the ones where you discussed his land holdings, asked about property values. I can make it look like you've been planning this from the start, 2 con artists working together, falling out over the split. Victor's smile was cold. That's my insurance. Show me. Victor retrieved another folder from the safe. Inside were copies of her letters. How had he gotten those? Along with forged correspondence that made her look guilty. Clara felt sick. Even if she took his documents, he could still destroy her, unless she destroyed him first. This is impressive, she said carefully. You've thought of everything. I always do. Except one thing. Clara stood, backing toward the door. You told me all of this assuming I'd keep quiet, but what if I don't? Victor's expression shifted from satisfaction to confusion to cold fury in seconds. You'd be implicating yourself. Maybe, but I'd also be bringing you down with me, and right now that sounds worth it. She reached for the doorknob. Victor moved fast, crossing the room to block her exit, his hand clamped on her wrist, hard enough to hurt. You're not going anywhere with those documents. Let go of me. Not until we reach an understanding. His grip tightened. You think you can threaten me? Manipulate me? I made you, Clara. I created this entire situation. Without me, you'd still be rotting in some Philadelphia boarding house. You're right, Clara said. You did create this, and that's going to be your downfall. She twisted, bringing her knee up hard into his stomach. Victor doubled over with a grunt of pain. Clara wrenched free, grabbed the leather folder, and ran for the door. She got 2 steps before Victor recovered, tackling her from behind. They crashed to the floor, papers scattering everywhere. Victor's hand found her throat, squeezing. Stupid girl, he hissed. Did you really think you could outwit me? Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. Black spots danced in her vision. Then suddenly the pressure released. She gasped for air, rolling away to see Ethan hauling Victor across the room and slamming him against the wall. Touch her again and I'll kill you, Ethan growled. You're too late, Victor wheezed. She has nothing. I have everything. Do you? Judge Morrison entered, Tom and Miguel behind him. Because from where I stand, you just assaulted a woman and threatened to kill her. That's witnessed by 4 people now. Victor's face went pale. This was a private meeting. In a building with very thin walls, Morrison continued. And a judge standing right outside who heard every word of your confession. He began gathering the scattered papers. Arson, fraud, bribery, conspiracy, and documenting it all yourself. That was particularly helpful. Those are private documents, illegally obtained. Actually, Mrs. Hale was invited to see them. You opened your safe voluntarily, showed her the contents, and explained what they meant. That makes it a voluntary disclosure. Morrison's smile was thin. I've been a judge for 20 years, Victor. You should have studied law before trying to pervert it. Victor looked around the room, seeming to truly understand his situation for the first time. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling, and there was no way to stop it. Margaret will never let this go to trial, he said desperately. She has too much to lose. Margaret's husband has been dead 5 years, Morrison replied. Whatever involvement he had can't hurt her now. And Elizabeth might be disappointed, but she's young. She'll recover. He nodded to Tom and Miguel. Gentlemen, if you'd be so kind as to escort Mr. Hale to the jail. You can't do this, Victor said as they grabbed his arms. I'm a respected businessman. I have rights. So did all the people you destroyed, Clara said, her voice raspy from his chokehold. Tell me, Victor, did you consider their rights when you burned their property? Ruined their reputations? Drove them off their land? Victor's eyes locked on hers, and for a moment she saw pure hatred there. This isn't over. Yes, Ethan said quietly. It is. They watched Tom and Miguel lead Victor out in handcuffs. The man who'd terrorized Redemption Springs for years, who'd seemed untouchable, reduced to a criminal being paraded down Main Street. People stopped to stare. Whispers spread like wildfire. Judge Morrison gathered the rest of the documents carefully. This will take time to sort through, prosecute properly, but there's enough here to put him away for years. What about the others? Clara asked. The people he mentioned, the railroad officials, the assessor. They'll face consequences too. This is bigger than just Victor. It's going to shake the whole territory. Morrison looked at Ethan. Your ranch is safe, by the way. The committee's ruling is void. I'll see to that personally. And with this evidence, you can sue Victor for damages from the fire. Ethan nodded, but he was looking at Clara, checking her over. Are you hurt? I'm fine. She touched her throat gingerly. Mostly. We should get you to a doctor. Later. Right now I need air. They walked out together into the bright afternoon. Main Street was in chaos, people running toward the jail, demanding to know what had happened. Sarah Chen caught Clara's arm as they passed. Is it true? Victor's been arrested? Yes. For what? Everything, Clara said simply. Sarah's eyes widened. Then she smiled, fierce and bright. Good. That man's had this coming for years. Others approached, a mix of supporters and skeptics. Clara answered questions mechanically, too exhausted for diplomacy. Finally, Ethan pulled her away, guiding her to the wagon. Home, he said. You need rest. The ride back was quiet. Clara watched the landscape roll past, the same prairie she'd crossed that first day, when she'd been terrified and desperate and alone. So much had changed. She'd changed. At the ranch, Ethan helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered on her waist. You were incredible today, he said softly. Brave and smart and reckless, Clara interrupted. I nearly got myself killed. But you didn't. You got him. Got everything we needed to win. We got it, she corrected. This wasn't just me, Ethan. It was all of us. He studied her face in the fading light. Clara, about what happens now. If you're about to tell me I should leave, that I've fulfilled my obligation and can go, no. He cupped her face gently. I'm asking you to stay. Not as a mail-order bride, not out of obligation, but because I want you here. Because somewhere along the way you became more than a partner. You became… What? Clara's heart was racing. Essential, Ethan finished. You became essential, and the thought of you leaving, of this house being empty again, I can't. I won't. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. I'm not leaving. I told you that. I know, but I needed to say it anyway. Needed you to know that you're wanted here, that you belong. She kissed him then, properly this time, not the desperate gesture of the morning, but something deeper, something that tasted of possibility and future and home. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. I've wanted to do that for weeks, Ethan admitted. Why didn't you? Didn't think I had the right. You came here running from one bad marriage. Didn't want to push you into something you weren't ready for. And now? Now I'm hoping you might be ready. Eventually. When you're sure. He stepped back, giving her space. No pressure, Clara. We can take this as slow as you need. She looked at him. This quiet, decent man who'd offered her refuge when she'd had none, who'd stood by her through everything Victor had thrown at them, who'd trusted her even when it seemed insane to do so. And she felt something shift in her chest, some wall she'd built around her heart beginning to crumble. I'm not sure I know how to do this, she admitted. The romance part, the trust part, my marriage before wasn't a marriage. It was survival. Ethan's voice was firm. This is different. We're different, and we have time to figure it out. Time, Clara repeated. The word felt precious, luxurious. She'd spent so long just trying to get through each day that the idea of having a future to plan for seemed almost impossible. But maybe that's what this had all been about. Not just defeating Victor or saving the ranch, but reclaiming the right to a future, to possibility, to choice. The trial happened 6 weeks later. The territorial prosecutor brought charges based on Judge Morrison's documentation, and the case was airtight. Victor's carefully maintained records became his downfall. Every scheme, every crime laid out in his own handwriting. Margaret Holbrook testified reluctantly, confirming her late husband's involvement but claiming ignorance of the full scope. Elizabeth broke off her engagement publicly, a dramatic scene in the courtroom that everyone would talk about for months. The railroad officials were arrested. The county assessor resigned in disgrace. And Victor Hale, for all his polish and charm, stood before a jury of territorial citizens and heard the word guilty ring through the courtroom like a bell. He was sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. As they led him away, he looked at Clara one last time. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear or triumph or anything at all. He'd tried to destroy her and failed. That was enough. The aftermath took time to settle. Ethan sued for damages and won enough to rebuild the barn and replace their lost supplies. Other victims of Victor's schemes came forward, filing their own suits, reclaiming what they'd lost. The town of Redemption Springs had to reckon with how easily they'd been manipulated, how quickly they'd turned on outsiders at Victor's instigation. Some people apologized to Clara. Others simply stopped whispering when she passed, and a few remained hostile, convinced that she must have been guilty of something even if Victor's crimes had been proven. Clara learned to live with that. She'd spent too much of her life seeking universal approval, trying to be what others wanted her to be. Here, on this harsh frontier with this quiet man, she'd learned a different lesson. Sometimes surviving was enough. Sometimes standing your ground mattered more than being liked. 3 months after the trial, on a cold November morning, Clara and Ethan stood in Judge Morrison's chambers and exchanged proper vows. Not the hasty legal arrangement Clara had claimed at the committee hearing, but real promises made with full hearts. Tom stood as witness. Sarah Chen and Helen Graves were there, along with Miguel and a handful of others who'd supported them through everything. It was a small ceremony, nothing like the elaborate Philadelphia wedding Clara had endured with Harold. But it was real. It was chosen. And when Ethan slipped a simple gold band on her finger, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. That winter was hard, as all frontier winters were, but they faced it together, Clara and Ethan working side by side, building their life piece by piece. She learned to ride, to rope cattle, to read weather signs and trust her instincts. He learned to share space, to accept help, to let someone in past the walls he'd built after Rachel's death. They learned each other slowly, carefully, with the patience of people who'd both been broken before and knew how fragile healing could be. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The new barn stood solid and true. The cattle survived. And when Clara discovered she was pregnant, she felt terror and joy in equal measure. I don't know how to be a mother, she confessed to Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. I don't know if I'll be any good at it. You didn't know how to be a rancher either, Ethan pointed out. But you figured it out. That's different. Is it? He took her hand. Clara, you're the strongest person I know. You've survived things that would have broken most people. You'll be an incredible mother. You don't know that. Yes, I do, because I've watched you. I've seen how you fight for what matters. And this baby, our baby, will matter more than anything. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. We'll figure it out together. Same as everything else. She leaned against him, letting herself believe it, letting herself hope. The baby came in late autumn, a girl with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Rachel for Ethan's first wife, and Elizabeth for the woman Clara might have become if she'd never found the courage to leave Philadelphia. Rachel Elizabeth Hale came into the world screaming, fierce and stubborn and alive. And when Clara held her for the first time, feeling that small, warm weight in her arms, she finally understood what she'd been fighting for all along. Not just survival, not just security, but this, the chance to build something new, to create a future where her daughter would never have to make the desperate choices Clara had made, where she'd grow up knowing she was wanted, valued, loved without condition. Clara looked at Ethan, who was staring at their daughter with wonder, and felt her heart finally fully open. This man who'd given her refuge had given her so much more. A home, a family, a chance to be someone other than the broken woman who'd arrived at Redemption Springs Station all those months ago. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan looked up, confused. "For what?" "For answering my letter, for not giving up on me, for standing with me when the whole world seemed against us." "Clara, I should be thanking you. You saved me as much as I saved you." "Then we saved each other," she said. "Yeah," Ethan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "I guess we did." Years passed. The ranch prospered. Rachel grew strong and wild, running across the prairie like she owned it. 2 more children followed, a boy they named Thomas after Tom, who'd become like family, and another girl they called Sarah. The town of Redemption Springs changed too. The railroad came through, bringing growth and commerce. New families arrived, and Clara found herself in the unexpected position of welcoming them, offering the same kind of support she'd once desperately needed. Margaret Holbrook eventually made a stiff apology, admitting she'd been manipulated by Victor and had allowed her ambitions for her daughter to cloud her judgment. It wasn't friendship exactly, but they reached a working détente. Elizabeth married a railroad engineer and moved to Denver, apparently happier away from her mother's expectations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful, Clara would stand on the porch and remember that first day. How scared she'd been. How certain that this was just another form of survival, another temporary solution to an endless problem. She'd been so wrong. This wasn't survival. This was life. Real, messy, complicated life, full of joy and struggle and ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. One evening, nearly 5 years after Victor's trial, Tom brought news that Victor Hale had died in territorial prison. Pneumonia, they said. He'd been 41 years old. Ethan took the news silently. Clara watched him process it, seeing grief and relief and guilt cross his face in turns. "I should feel something," he said finally. "He was my brother." "You do feel something," Clara replied. "You feel everything. That's what makes you different from him. I keep thinking about when we were boys, before everything went wrong. He wasn't always like this. No one's born a monster. They choose it." Clara took his hand. "You chose differently. That matters." They didn't attend the funeral, but Ethan donated money for a proper burial because even monsters deserve that much. And then they moved on, because the past couldn't be allowed to poison the future. Rachel turned 6 and started lessons at the new school in town. Thomas was 4, already showing signs of his father's quiet strength. Baby Sarah was 2, all energy and laughter. The ranch needed expanding, so they bought the Fletcher property when James decided to retire. Tom stayed on as foreman, training the next generation of ranch hands. Miguel married and built a house on the eastern section of the property. And Clara, who'd arrived in Redemption Springs with nothing but a worn carpet bag and crushing desperation, became one of the town's most respected citizens. She joined the Ladies' Auxiliary officially, helped establish a lending library, and quietly assisted other women in difficult situations, providing refuge, offering advice, creating networks of support. She never forgot what it felt like to be judged before being known, to be desperate and dismissed. And she made sure no other woman in Redemption Springs would face that alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised her with a trip to Denver, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Tom and his wife. It was the first time they'd been away from the ranch together, and the city felt alien after years of prairie life. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at restaurants, walked tree-lined streets so different from Redemption Springs' dusty main road. And on their last night, as they prepared for bed, Clara caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was nothing like the desperate girl who'd boarded that train a decade ago. This woman had laugh lines and sun-weathered skin. Her hands were calloused from work. Her hair, still dark but showing threads of silver, was pulled back practically. She looked older, harder, but also more alive. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, coming up behind her. "That I don't recognize myself sometimes. That woman in Philadelphia, she feels like a different person entirely." She was. "You've changed. We both have. Do you ever regret it? Bringing me here?" Ethan wrapped his arms around her, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Not for a single second. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Hale. You and our children and this life we've built. It's more than I ever dreamed of having. Even with everything we went through, the fire, the trial, Victor, especially because of that, we were tested and we didn't break. That matters." He turned her to face him. "I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. Completely." "I love you too," Clara said, and meant it with everything she was. They made love that night in the fancy hotel bed, slow and tender, celebrating not just their anniversary, but their survival, their victory, their choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year. The next morning they returned to the ranch, to their children and their land and their ordinary, extraordinary life. And Clara felt, for perhaps the first time ever, complete peace. She'd survived. More than that, she'd thrived. She'd taken the worst the world could throw at her and transformed it into something beautiful. A home, a family, a legacy. Years later, when Rachel was grown and asking about her mother's life before the ranch, Clara told her the truth. All of it. The abuse, the investigation, the desperate choice to become a mail-order bride, the way Victor had tried to destroy them, the way they'd fought back. "Weren't you scared?" Rachel asked. "Terrified, every single day. But you did it anyway." "Because I had to. Because sometimes the only way out is through." Clara took her daughter's hands. "That's what I want you to understand, Rachel. Life will test you. People will judge you. You'll face things that seem impossible. But you're stronger than you know, and you don't have to face anything alone." "Did you feel alone when you first came here?" "Yes, but I learned that alone and lonely aren't the same thing. You can be surrounded by people and feel lonely. Or you can have just a few true allies and never feel alone at all." Clara smiled. "I found my allies. Your father, Tom, Sarah, Helen. They stood with me when no one else would. That's what made all the difference." "I want to be like that," Rachel said. "Strong, like you." "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." Clara lived to see all three of her children grown and married with families of their own. Saw the ranch expand until it was one of the most successful in the territory. Saw Redemption Springs grow from a rough frontier town into a proper city with schools and hospitals and culture. She lived to be 73 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep with Ethan beside her and her children nearby. At her funeral, the entire town turned out, generations of people whose lives she'd touched, women she'd helped, families she'd welcomed. Ethan spoke at the service, his voice steady despite his grief. "Clara came to this town as a stranger," he said. "Judged before she was known, dismissed before she was understood. But she refused to accept that judgment. She stood her ground, fought for her place, and built a life that mattered. She taught all of us what real courage looks like, not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, to stand when it would be easier to run, to fight when it would be easier to surrender." He paused, emotion breaking through. "She was my wife, my partner, my best friend, and she showed me that broken things can heal, that desperate choices can lead to beautiful outcomes, that love, real love, isn't something you fall into by accident. It's something you build day by day, choice by choice." They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, beside the spot Ethan had already picked out for himself. The gravestone was simple: Clara Elizabeth Whitmore. Hale. Beloved. Wife, mother, friend. She stood her ground. And in the years that followed, when people in Redemption Springs talked about Clara Hale, and they did talk for decades, they told her story with respect, with admiration, with the understanding that sometimes the most ordinary courage is the most extraordinary kind. The courage to leave, to start over, to demand better, to refuse to be defined by other people's judgments, to build something beautiful from the ashes of desperation. Clara's story became legend in its quiet way, not because she did anything spectacular by objective standards, but because she did what so many others couldn't. She survived. She thrived. She transformed her pain into purpose and her fear into strength. And the ranch she'd helped build, the family she'd raised, the community she'd shaped, all of it stood as testament to a simple truth, that no one is beyond redemption, that fresh starts are possible, that home isn't a place you're born into, but something you create through determination and love and refusing to give up even when the whole world tells you to quit. Clara Whitmore had arrived in Redemption Springs as a stranger in a hostile land, but she'd died as a woman who belonged, not because the land had accepted her, but because she'd claimed her right to belong and made it impossible for anyone to deny. That was her victory. Not over Victor Hale, though that mattered too, but over the belief that she was powerless, that she was defined by her past, that she was anything less than exactly who she chose to be. In the end, that was the greatest triumph of all.